2 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you so much, and let your neighbors know that we are here. The name Dr. Tewarie. You know that name. Everybody in education, yes, they know that name too. Dr. Tewarie has been a member of Parliament, Minister of Government, Chairman of the National Institute of Higher Education, Research, Science and Technology. That's NIHERST. He's a board member of the National Training Agency and Chairman of the National Tertiary Education Policy Committee, was a member for Vision 2020. I looked over his... if I had to read exactly all the things he's been involved in, I would take probably half the program. I don't think we could do that this morning. He also served as chairman of both the National Competitive and Innovation Council of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean Competitive Center, among others. He spent 6 years as the pro-vice chancellor and principal of the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, and that last posting specifically drives our discussion today, and it is for that purpose that we are honored to have you here, Dr. Tewarie. Thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here. Morning to your listeners.
It is great to have you here. There has been varied views on G.A.T.E, sir. As I mentioned, 6 years up there as the Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies. This government-assisted program for tuition expenses, it provides a financial setting that makes it easier for the citizenry to move forward, those pursuing G.A.T.E-approved tertiary education in different public and private institutions. And folks say that we've been spending this money, and there is one question. Has it been worth the while? The question is, if we have spent, as is reported, over $7.5 billion on this program over 12 years. It has served about, at 65 institutions, about 194 to 200,000 people have benefited from this. Has the country received a good return on the investment?
Well, you have to see things in context. I mean, if you're talking about $7.5 billion, and I take your figures at face value.
I've mentioned figures only because the Minister of Education mentioned these figures.
Yes, if you say $7.5 billion and over 12 years, when you look at the average budget in any given year would have been over that period, about $50 billion. So you're talking about $600 billion. So $6.5 billion, $6.7 billion is a very small percentage of that for education. And secondly, someone said a long time ago, if you object to education, then try ignorance. And I think it's very difficult to say that all $6.7 billion have been spent well. But I think it's reasonable to claim that given the expenditure in terms of the total budgetary allocation for the period, it wasn't a bad investment by any government over the period.
I'm happy to hear that, because as if you think of first worldism and you think in terms of having a workforce that's competitive in the world,
that's right,
you must have educated populace.
That's right. That's your base.
That is your base. I mean, absent that, you're not even in discussion here. So it is a commendable program that was initiated.
Sure.
The waste we are talking about and the abuse of the program has gone through many administrations. What primarily would you say allowed the wastage to go unchecked until now, to the extent that we're hearing, just as you said, as you alluded to in your response, a lot of this has not been guided well?
I heard the head of the G.A.T.E administration, who is a person and which is an administration that spanned governmental administration. I heard her last week say that, in fact, they had recovered $70 billion from students who needed to pay back because they did not honor their commitments.
Right.
She said that $40 million were recovered in 2015, which meant that $30 million would have been recovered somewhere between 2012 and 14, I suspect mostly in 13 and 14. So it's clear that in the administration of G.A.T.E, tightening up had begun and following the students to make sure that they honored their obligation was something that was very much part of the picture under the last administration. This government is taking the position that they want to pursue that with intensity and to make sure that everyone is honest in their relationship with the state as far as money given by the state is concerned for education. I have no problem at all with that. I think the state has an obligation to ensure that as a country we have the workforce that we need going forward, and the intellectual capital and capacity that we need going forward. But I think it is also a personal responsibility and a family obligation to ensure that if government gives you a grant, that you in fact use that grant for the purpose for which it was given.
8 minutes after 10 o'clock, in case you're joining us late for brunch, my guest is the esteemed Dr. Tewarie. He was for 6 years, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies. Before the latest information we have, the latest measures being made, it was accepted by all that this was unsustainable. That being the case, if you share that view, what has happened, some of the directives of the task force that's been adopted by the government, that really is not a surprise to you, is it? Because,
No.
I mean, there are many other countries with greater GDP than we have, and they see that putting a program like that, admirable as it is non-sustainable.
That is true. And in fact, I wrote about this. In fact, UNESCO adopted a policy paper that I did in 2011. I have it here. I can leave it with you if you
Thank
would
you.
like. And basically, the title of my policy paper, which was adopted as a policy paper for small states, was called Finding Solutions for Sustainable Financing of Tertiary Education in Small States. And it basically takes the position that the level of tertiary education required and the numbers that you need to educate in a knowledge driven world, in a technology infested world, and in a situation of high demand for tertiary education could not be sustained by government spending alone. And it advocates a way of approaching the issue of sustainable financing, because I saw education, including higher education, as an investment, not by a country in their citizens, rather than an expenditure. And therefore, you had to find a solution to the financing problem. So I am not in any way against the government for trying to find a solution for the sustaining tertiary education. My concern was, first of all, the fact that they were trying to make decisions in August that would affect students in September. And I came out very strongly against that. They did not do it. In other words, they gave a bly to the students who were in the system, and I think that is good.
Or best to say, common sense trumped knee-jerk reaction.
I don't like the word Trump.
Yeah, neither do I, actually. Yes.
But the second thing is that I did not feel if you had criteria that related to income levels, that you should also introduce the element of age. The government went with that decision, saying that anybody over 50 will not be financed.
I'm going to get to that after.
I will simply quickly say, simply address the 50-year-olds in the same way that you address all citizens, which is, depending on income,
the means testing.
They address the issue of paying, how much you pay, etc.
I want to get into means testing, but I know that's a very sore point with you too.
Well, that's the other thing. And the business of managing the wastage, the duplication, etc., I am not against that. All right, so my own issue, my big issue after that, and they have taken a year to address two issues. One is the means testing issue, and secondly, the way of working out the funding modalities through loans and various systems for students, with the objective that no one who wants to have an education should be denied one because they cannot pay. Now, those two issues are very important to me. The means test issue and making sure that anybody who is capable of getting an education and who desires one should get it, and they should not get it because they do not have the money. So those are the two. I will not pronounce on those two issues because they said that they are going to work it out
More
in a
details
year.
later, yes.
So I would say, yes, let's work it out and work it out in a way that it can be sustainable.
Member of Parliament Dr. Tewarie is my guest this morning. I'm struck by the degree of underemployment, as I'm sure you are,
Yes.
that greets University of the West Indies students and the ability to synchronize the needs of the country with the graduates from the university, which is needs alignment. I am confident a manpower needs assessment was discussed when you, during your tenure at the university. If one was done, what was the result?
No, when I was at the university, the second phase of my career after principal was Pro-Vice Chancellor for Planning and Development. And during that time, I instituted a research system that basically tracked the students every year. So we knew, for instance, that more students were employed in the private sector in Trinidad than in the public sector, graduates. But that was not so in Barbados, where most students went to the public sector, and that was not so in Jamaica, where most people went to the public sector. And we also knew that there was about 18% of the graduates, on average. I'm talking during the period that I was there, we tracked for 3 years. On average, about 18% of the graduates found great difficulty finding a job within a year. And we found that approximately 14 or 15% found themselves in a situation in which they were doing jobs in which they consider themselves underemployed. In other words, overeducated for their jobs. Now, why does that happen? I think there are many reasons, but I would just venture 3. One is that the curriculum is not at the university as well aligned as it should be to market needs. Secondly, the business organizations in the country, as sophisticated as some of them may be, are not well aligned to the global economic challenges, and therefore they cannot absorb the knowledge products out of the university in the best way that a company should. And the third reason is the diversification issue, which is that if you do not diversify fast enough, it's very hard to absorb the growing number of graduates from the tertiary level institutions. But you asked the question of manpower planning, and while we did not do that at the University of the West Indies, when I was Minister of Planning in the year 2014, we initiated discussion with the IDB for a manpower study based on our strategies of diversification and projections of what investment might mean in terms of jobs that we would need. Now, that would have been left before this government. So if they might want to look at it and either carry it as we conceptualized it, because I had a long set of discussions with the IDB people. They may want to modify it based on other things that they may be thinking about in terms of policy. But I would certainly advise that they do not ignore it or not carry it through. Because I think if they got it, at the very worst, you would say, okay, we know what the report says, but this is what we will do, even if you disagree. But if it makes sense, of course, it makes sense to implement it, to align it. Yeah.
Dr. Tewarie is my guest this morning. I was, and I applaud you, quickly stating, when I heard you say, I see the need for some of these adjustments. I've got a couple of areas I'm concerned about. However, with details to come, I'll wait for the year, because too often we have folks who jump into the fray because something is in the public arena and they feel they must say something. But I gather that is tempered by your tenure at the University of the West Indies, seeing this firsthand. You must be encouraged, as you said, by some of the private-public partnership public-private partnerships that the government articulated in some of the areas too, raising the loan ceiling in addition to having a national education saving fund and putting out tax incentives for the private sector, for employees and their students and stuff like that.
Those are positive things, and we, in fact, had conceptualized some of those things. The names are different, but certainly what we had thought about and what I think the government should think about is how do you create a loan infrastructure that is easy to access and that is low in interest rate.
And not the albatross as it is with other students across the world.
Low in interest for the student and is not really triggered unless the student not only graduates but gets a job. And I think you need to do a system like that. We also had in mind to have a system in which the private sector, both multinationals and local and international, because you can get grants internationally for this, would contribute, and it would become a kind of scholarship fund and loan fund so that you could support students. So let's say someone qualifies for 50% of government intervention. But they are not in a position to sustain a loan. They may get a further grant from this, or they may have a combination of grants and loans. So these alternative methods of financing, if they are carefully thought through, and if sustainability is built into it, are very important.
It is 19 minutes after 10 o'clock. I just want to mention that my guest, who is the MP for Caroni Central, Dr. Tewarie, has a new book out, Sustainable Development, Thinking Through Making It Happen. Thought I would mention that. And now we get into his area of some angst, because it is a fact that we all accept non-specific and unmonitored means testing can become a nightmare. Yes. It is true that more details are coming forward. What areas would you like to see more transparency in, Doctor?
I think the way to build trust in a means testing system is to guarantee transparency. And that would mean that you would either have to have a system of administration that is either guaranteed to be non-political and non-partisan, or something that is multi-partisan in a very clear and unequivocal way, so that the battles inside the process can be settled internally in a way that people on the outside trust. And all I would do at this point is to say that the transparency of a means testing system must be guaranteed. There are difficulties with the methodology of means testing in a country such as Trinidad and Tobago, where all the systems are not as, what can I say?
Efficient.
Efficient and effective, and where there are dysfunctionalities in the system. So one has to take that into account. And there must be, in my view, in situations in which people feel aggrieved, an opportunity to appeal. So I would say transparency, recognition of dysfunctional systems as a reality,
and a clear path of redress.
Yes.
Dr. Tewarie, we're talking this morning about G.A.T.E. The determination of admission is an area that disquiets you greatly, and this came up as a result of the government's decision to not fund students going aboard, medical students, that is. Yes. And you're worried about the uniformity because UWI's level, of course, of admission is higher than other institutions. You worry that this could be a discriminatory path. Explain that for me, please.
Well, I mean, academics are a complex thing, right? And it is my belief, as someone who has been involved in education all my life, that anybody, no matter what their starting point, can learn. And more than that, you can have accelerated learning with exposure. And thirdly, if you pay some careful attention to the identification of talents, and there are multiple talents that people have, you can actually take somebody who at an early age may have been judged to be slow And in that area of talent, they may be a genius. So I really feel that you have to have an education system that allows for that. And therefore, you need to have diversity of opportunity in the system, but you also need to have a meritocracy in the system. At the same time, the government is concerned about the issue of equity, which is a legitimate issue. You cannot, in a society, not address the question of equity in education. So, on the one side, there are the cost, equity, wastage, and abuse issue. But on the other side, there's the investment issue, the merit issue, the quality issue, and the sustainability issue, both in terms of financing of education fairly, and then secondly, the issue of the sustainability of the system to help your economy to be sustainable. All right? Now, in this situation, the problem with that bothered me with St. George's is that the requirements for entry into medicine at St. George's are different. They're slightly lower than the system in the University of the West Indies. Now, what they have done is that they've stopped the funding for the students in St. George's, but they are going to absorb them in the University of the West Indies. I have no problem with that, because you cannot cut the funding from the students and then tell them you cannot any longer have a route to becoming a doctor in an area of study that you've already started. So I have no problem with that. But what I'm concerned about is that this is not started now as a precedent for undermining a meritocratic system in UWI. And don't get me wrong, you can have people at different levels entering a medical program and becoming a doctor in different institutions. What I would not like to see is a reduction of the entry requirements in UWI because you now have created a problem. I would like to see a solution started elsewhere. Right?
Understood. One of the areas that we're looking at here also, Dr. Tewarie, is the cost of a child's education. Now, you said that you disquieted, understandably so, and many people are, that when you think in terms of the income of a family, the consideration is for one person, but you have families where there are more than one child.
4 kids,
that require that sort of attention. This puts on Trinidad and Tobago a reality that we've been immune to all this time. One is when you're planning your family, you have to look at the cost of education.
Yes,
it is going to be uncomfortable for some people, but it is part of the reality that we just cannot escape.
Yeah, well, one good thing, all right, from if you look at the challenge that you've just posed, how many children should I have? If education is one of my concerns for my children, and there's a limit to how much I can earn, and therefore be able to save to put them through school.
As we suspect, it is the priority in the minds of most all parents.
Right. But a good thing from that point of view is that the birth rate in Trinidad and Tobago, based on 2011 CSO figures, because a census was done in that year, is very low. It is 0.5%. And I think
so unwittingly it's pointing in the right direction.
Yes. The second thing is that, as you know, over 66% of the graduates coming out of the tertiary education system in Trinidad and Tobago are women. What that means is that they postpone marriage and childbirth to a later point, and that also leads to a reduction in the number of children. They may choose to have one child or two, okay, as the case might be. And but the problem side of it is that you have a lot of teenage pregnancies and teenage single mother pregnancies. And so in some of those sectors of the community, you have larger than average numbers of children. And in that kind of situation, that is where you would need to support the child more, because you cannot say because somebody is poor and does not have the income and they have 4 children, you are going to deny their children education and opportunity to be economically self-sufficient in the society. So I think we need to look at the problems in terms of the demographics of the society. I don't think we are going to have a big problem with the educated and the middle class, because you are seeing reduction in birth rates there. And this is across the board in Trinidad and Tobago. But with the lower income groups, and this is again across the board in Trinidad and Tobago.
And across the world, I hear.
Yes, you are having a challenge which we must begin to address.
And addressing that problem is a socioeconomic conversation that is for another program.
Yes.
But just for this one.
And it's a tough one.
It is a very tough one, of course
Yes,
it is. Folks have to recognize there's a broken social contract. They have to recognize the 5,000 people who are falling out of the cracks every year and what happens to them, and why this sense of belonging sometimes is embraced in this thing of I'm going to make a child for my own self-esteem and my own self-worth and so on. But that's a different talk show.
Very complex issue.
You did open the door talking about the older generation not only living longer, working longer, and postponing some of their own education for the betterment of their child or for the immediate issues of existence. So 50-year-olds, the government said we cannot continue financing this. We're going to let those who are already in continue. We're going to take care of that. If you're already registered, you're in. But if you're not, as of next year, that's it. How do you come down on that? Because there are those who are saying that this is what they call it, age discrimination.
It is. And I mean, one of the editorials today said that not only is it age discrimination, but it's unconstitutional, one of the newspapers today. And of course, the Equal Opportunities Commission also said the same thing. And I came down against it, not simply on those bases, which I do, but because of the how you apply a principle that governs education opportunity for all the people equally. You see, you have to do that, because there's no reason why you could not apply the same principle for people over 50 years of age. And we need to understand people 50 years of age have 15 years in the system, in which the system has to continue to innovate and continue to be competitive. And you can't expect to create a whole new breed of inflows into the private and public sectors who are creative and innovative and leave these people at a standstill. You are going to create problems that you do not anticipate.
You also
in
want
the
to
system, you know. So I think it's very short-sighted. I hope the government recognizes that it's a misguided policy. It could be easily fixed by simply applying the same principles to people over 50. So you have a non-age discriminatory policy. And I think that a lot of people will benefit from it. I mean, there's very little chance of abuse, in my view, of people of that age. A person who goes to university or school or tertiary educational exposure at that age is not going there to waste their time, believe me.
That's right. Dr. Tewarie, you have agreed that we will take a couple of phone calls, but I've got so much going on here that I need to get from you in the short period of time that you have. I'll throw out the telephone numbers to our listeners. We'll take a limited amount of calls for Dr. Tewarie. Please keep them focused and on the issue we're talking about. 628-2250, 628-2250, and 628-9107. Any questions on the issue of G.A.T.E that we're talking about? The recovery of money by students is another area, Doctor. Recovery of money from students who don't fulfill either their grade average or their contractual commitment. It has been dismal. Primarily, what is the reason for that, and what can we do to better arrest that? Well,
as I said before, I mean, we have already been told, I forget the lady's name, I know Teresa is her first name, I can't remember her last name, but she heads the G.A.T.E administration unit in the Ministry of Education.
Yes.
And she indicated that $70 million have in fact been collected between 2012 and 2015, with 40 million of it being collected in 2015. So all they need to do is to pursue that. I don't like the approach of the Minister of Education being a kind of hound dog chasing after the students. I don't think the culture requires us to be that way. Simply have the systems, hold the students to account, let them come in, deal with the matter, and let them meet their obligations. You don't need to create a police kind of orientation for this. After all, it's education, you know.
Understood. Just before I go, I move away from that, because I know your time is limited as to what we spoke about. I do want to get into the Chaguaramas situation. So just in conclusion of this, we are going to wait for the year to see what the how the government refine, tweak, and get this whole thing together.
The two issues, the financial support outside of G.A.T.E, all right, which are about a system of loans as well as grants, and the means test issue.
But in the interim, you are nobody's ever happy when you have to charge people money. But you are understanding of the need to have the means testing, like you said, properly monitored, and the tiered system of students paying, which is to say above 10,000, 25%. 25% is what they pay. The government paid 25, and then the dollar for dollar situation when you get above 20,000. That's fine with you.
Well, I think one can understand why those things make sense in the context of equity.
All right. Dr. Tewarie, my guest here inside Brunch, and he has a commitment and a close time. We did not initially agree on this, but he did acquiesce to questions on the Chaguaramas Development Authority. By the way, his book is Sustainable Development, just reminding you, Thinking It Through, Making It Happen. That's the new book from Dr. Tewarie, Sustainable Development. Be sure to grab a piece of it. I just received it, fortunately. Haven't had a chance to look at it, but because of the time you have spent in this area and also being Minister of Planning and Development, it is going to be worth the read. The Chaguaramas Development Authority. The board of the Chaguaramas Development Authority, chaired by Anthony Pei, has recommended that all leases entered into during the period 2015 to 2016 be deemed illegal, therefore null and void. The statements coming out of there includes that some of the decisions were taken right up to the election, and while there is nothing illegal about that, it does raise questions. Some of the primary area advanced, my understanding of this thus far, is that this should have gone to the Parliament, and it did not. Please explain that.
No, I don't think that's true. Listen, this is a new government, and you have a new board of directors. And if there is anything that they want to review, they should review it. I think that's reasonable. But if they review it and there are no problems, they should not be obstructionist. And if they review it and there's a problem, then there are means of dealing with the problem. So there are many options that they can take. My own view is that, leases take a long time to negotiate. If you settle something in 2014, it is because you started discussing it perhaps 2011 or 12. If you settle it in 15, it's perhaps 2012 or 13. And on that basis, they should understand themselves that they will be in the same position over the next period. What I would say to you that I know for a fact is this. In 2011, when I inherited the Chaguaramas Development Authority together with a board that was already in place, and I did not change anyone, I subsequently, when the term came to an end, made a few changes. But up to that time, I carried on with the board. The 9% of the land controlled by the CDA in the Chaguaramas Peninsula were given out to various parties for development. For some of those parties, there were leases. We thought that the leases were perhaps undercosted. For some of them, there were not leases. There were no leases. On some of them, there were month-to-month arrangements. On some of them, there were just no documentation whatsoever, perhaps a letter or something like that. And what the board in my understanding, sought to do was to make sure that all new leases were properly done. And secondly, they tried to regularize some of the leases. And there was objection by many of the people who had leases because they were operating willy-nilly before. And they were now being subject to market rate conditions under the new leases. So all I would say is that we did a lot to upgrade Chaguaramas and make it available to the Trinidad and Tobago public. This was the one area of the country that had a history in which the land belonged to Trinidad and Tobago, but was not owned by the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Williams had to march in order to eventually get Chaguaramas handed over from the United States authorities because they had a naval base there.
Yeah, they had a lease from the British
Since that time, even through all the period of independence and republicanism, all we had was an army outpost, a naval capability on Chaguaramas with very little development, except that people in the society who were given out leases long before had use of this tremendous national park for personal leisure. We opened up the park with the boardwalk. We did phase 1, we did phase 2. We put small vendors in. We invited investors to get involved, and on the basis of that, leases were signed for them. As I said, if the government has a problem with the leases, they are in charge. They can review the leases. If there is anything wrong with them, there are options open to them. They can pursue. If they review the leases and there's nothing wrong with them, except perhaps their sense of urgency about the time, then they should honor these as a straight relationship between a board of directors acting in the interest of the CDA and the citizens of the country as investors investing in Trinidad and Tobago. I don't think it would be wise to take any different approach.
20 minutes away from the top of the hour, among the leases that are questioned, the Water and Amusement Park, the Hard Cut Development, Animals for Education, Point Court Development, Bukra Restaurant, also Shoreline Marine, Starbreast. I mean, 9 projects here they're looking at. And just to set the records
But these are
clear.
9 investment projects, are they not?
Yes.
I mean, they are going to bring investment. By the way, all of those leases that you're talking about will take up no more than 2% additional development space in Chaguaramas. I want to make that clear. Because that has, I told you, 9% had in fact been covered by 2011 when I was there. And that is in administrations prior to the People's Partnership. And all of those leases that you talk about will take up a total of 2% more space on the Chaguaramas Peninsula, and that includes the boardwalk, which has already been developed. And one appeal I would like to make to the new board is please do not allow the boardwalk to deteriorate. I passed there some time ago, maybe a month and a half ago, and I was I was quite appalled about the condition of the boardwalk, and although you had people there, in the nights, I don't think you have lights. Those kinds of things can be readily done, and they are not very costly things.
I'm so happy that you took the time to be with us this morning, because one of the things that I'd like to do on Brunch is to make things clear.
Sure.
The area where it is stated, and of course, as you said, all these things you can meet a lot of things, and you can approach it the way things should be approached. You investigate and you go and you correct. But the part of the report of this 240 Master Plan states that the agreements were not approved by Parliament as required by the order. Could you speak to that?
No, I don't know about that. Normally what happens is that things happen, they come to cabinet, and it is not my understanding that these things have to go before Parliament. We in fact were thinking of changing the Chaguaramas the constitutional arrangements under which the Chaguaramas, the legal basis under which the Chaguaramas Development Authority operates,
Operated,
so
okay.
that we could, in fact, have everything transparently and done before Parliament. But I don't think that is the necessity.
And the final part I want to...
And the other thing I heard about that I read in the papers is somebody said that things were done not according to the 1974 plan.
That's right.
Well, I mean, this is 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15. We did a whole new plan for Chaguaramas based on a national spatial strategy for Trinidad and Tobago. The national spatial strategy was laid in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago in 2013. We passed the Land Development and Facilitation Bill in 2014, I think, and we did the entire development program for Trinidad and Tobago. That all of these things were laid in Parliament. The special development plan for Chaguaramas we did in 2014. We had consultations in 2014 and 2015, and they were based on the principles of sustainable development and no more development than 2% additional land to be developed in Chaguaramas. I find it very, very, what can I say? I don't know, very backward in thinking that you would want to go back to a 1974 plan in which the term sustainable development hardly existed to talk about development of Chaguaramas.
I understand that, and the only part of that took my attention is because my understanding, and please again enlighten, my understanding was that any altering of that 74 development plan had to go to Parliament. You were saying that to 2013 is where the new checks and balances were put in place, the new approvals were put in place, and that is not your understanding.
No, I am not aware that any of these things had to go to Parliament.
I see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we're going to wait and see how that one plays out. Dr. Tewarie, there is just the final, and this is really the final part on this, because it's an indictment. You would align ministers, so it is not you directly, but it is a case of the management of the CDA. It goes on. Furthermore, the board believes that the former directors and senior management failed in their fiduciary responsibility to adequately safeguard the assets of the authority and should be brought to account for their actions. That is ominous at best.
Well, this is a board pronouncing on the decisions of another board. I do not know the truth of the matter or what are the facts that they are focused on.
Hence the reason I got my inquiry, yes.
Yes, but as I would say, if they feel they have a case or people violated the terms of their tenure or the terms of their jurisdiction, they are free to do that. But I would think that would be an unwise thing to do, because what that sets into motion is that every time you have a change of administration in a country, you have 5 years of investigation and lawsuits, and the country stands still while the politicians play.
As you and I spoke earlier before we actually walked into the studio, it is one of the areas that I am happy for the representation here this morning, and where I've heard you speak about this before, because G.A.T.E was the basis on which we got together, and we spoke of understanding the issues for Trinidad and Tobago and not the issues for a particular party.
Yes, and I think if we could be bigger about the politics and understand that the reason why you have political competition and contest is so that you would get a chance to drive your policies for development for the country as a whole, for all the people who live in it. If we understood those big objectives, perhaps we'd be less peculiar about our partisan limitations in bringing these things to bear on the development process.
There are some folks who would agree that continuity is the bedrock of any nation moving forward,
right.
save and except that they feel there was something egregious, and you address that by saying that board should pick that up with those board members.
Yes, you take it forward, yes.
Gotcha. One, in thanking you for being here this morning, Dr. Tewarie, I do want to ask you, there's a feeling by many people, it has been articulated, including the leader of the opposition, position, that we could be looking at a massive fallout as a consequence of these recommendations put into practice by the government vis-a-vis the G.A.T.E program. Do you anticipate a massive fallout?
When you say fallout,
students who cannot access, who cannot pay for continuing education and so on.
Well, as I said before, I mean, the government has to acknowledge that if it changes the game and that it now tells people they must find some portion or all of the money that needs to be spent for education of their children, it will present a challenge for many, many people. And I think that we are going to have a problem. That is why I said that it is important to see what they do with the means test, and it's important to see what they do with the other financial arrangements. Nobody says that government has to pay for everybody's education till eternity. I don't think that's sustainable. But it is the responsibility of government to have a system that is at once acknowledges merit, at once acknowledges the need for equity of opportunity as well as access, and that puts into place a sustainable system that would not deny any student an opportunity to get a good education, which means economic benefits for them and the society as a whole.
Thank you for allowing me to indulge, almost like a synopsis. It is one of my idiosyncrasies to start here and go all the way around and come right back to where I started.
Well, it's good to have a conclusion. It's good to have a conclusion.
Dr. Tewarie, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bishop. I really appreciate it.
I truly appreciate this morning, reminding our listeners the book is Sustainable Development. Bhoendradatt Tewarie. I stayed away from hitting the whole name all morning.
Bhoendradatt. It's not so hard.
Bhoendradatt.
You see, because my name is so short, that's why everybody says Bo.
No, well, it's easy because Bo knows everything. Doctor, thank you so much. Have yourself a wonderful day.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.